Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, I'm sure you already know, but Luffy is slowly bringing the world together. And he's not even trying to do that, which makes it all the more impressive. And by the conclusion of the story, I expect Luffy to have essentially the most impressive crew ever created since probably the Void Century. And by crew here, we're stretching the definition. Basically, Luffy's subordinates are going to be many, from all sorts of different walks of life, groups, factions. The Straw Hats are going to be the string that ties literally everyone together. I think that I don't need to argue that this is a theme of the story, right? And it is a story, so because it's a story and Oda's the author, he can make things look really pretty. It doesn't necessarily have to be realistic. So this is a somewhat difficult video to label, but basically I want to look at every clan, race, or tribe, or faction within the world of One Piece, or anything that Oda has sort of highlighted as distinct groups in the story, and I want to try to connect them to the Straw Hat Pirates. The Straw Hat Pirates in this case being defined as either the crew itself, the Grand Fleet, and maybe we'll include some twists and turns along the way. So this is kind of needless fluff for the video, but I just want to establish this, that I look at the Whitebeard Pirates as sort of my ideal setup for what the Straw Hats might look like at the end of the story in a final battle sort of context. Whitebeard had 16 division commanders, but it's made pretty clear, I think, that the division commanders were members of Whitebeard's actual crew. So it's essentially like looking at the members of these Straw Hats themselves, the ones that you're familiar with that travel to every island together. I'm uncertain of the specificities here, but when we're in Oden's flashback and Oden joins the Whitebeard Pirates, you can see that there was a time at least in which they didn't have multiple ships, and then sometime after that, Oden became the 2nd Division commander. The main difference being is that Whitebeard was on the seas for a very long time, and he liked to collect strays, and I think that there's a number somewhere north of 1,000 that were like legitimate members of the Whitebeard Pirates themselves. With so many members, they needed multiple ships. So the true crew, as you would think of it, they individually got their own ships and their own sort of hierarchies underneath Whitebeard, but what makes them like Whitebeard Pirates is that they fly the Whitebeard flag, which is different from, say, allied captains, or I suppose the proper term is subordinate captain. Allied captains, Whitebeard had those as well, flew their own flag. So if you look at something like the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, Straw Hat Grand Fleet are not Straw Hat Pirates because they don't fly Luffy's flag on their ship itself. They have their own names, the Barto Club, for instance, the Beautiful Pirates. The Grand Fleet are what the Wikipedia refers to as subordinate captains. The division commanders are like the actual crew. And the final constituents, which made up Whitebeard's side of the fight in Marineford, are just simple allies, right? That aren't necessarily friends or subordinate to Whitebeard, but they are fighting together for some sort of unified cause. I imagine in a final battle context with the Straw Hats, we're going to see something similar. You're going to have the actual Straw Hats there. You're going to see subordinate captains, the Grand Fleet, and then you're going to see allies. I want to mainly focus on ones that consider themselves subordinate to Luffy. These by nature, at least by the definitions I'm following, must be pirates. They must consider themselves by the final battle to be pirates. And or the world considers them to be pirates. That works as well. But I want to make sure that I'm exceptionally clear here. To become a member of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet required Luffy and the Grand Fleet members to share sake cups. They became brothers. It was a thing that was formally acknowledged. Not just simply groups of people that are friends that are working together, but they have acknowledged Luffy as their leader, even if they fly a different flag. Although the Grand Fleet really wanted to fly Straw Hat flags, but Luffy wasn't going to allow that. Ideally, I want to make both the Straw Hat crew and the Grand Fleet connect with every major group, faction, whatever in the story of One Piece, and I think that it is just very possible that that could happen. The other caveat, and this is going to be important as well, is that in order to be considered a Grand Fleet member, you must be a notorious pirate on your own. So you must have at least some time to build your reputation alone outside of the Straw Hat sphere. The Grand Fleet is currently doing that. They exist in the New World. They are currently doing things, making a name for themselves as individual crews. The reason that I've set this up this way is because My current headcanon, you can disagree with this, that's fine, but what I think is that the world is going to break before we get to the final battle. The rule of the world government is going to crumble, and you're going to start to see it fracture. It's going to become chaos, and this is going to lead to a lot of people heading to the sea and basically choosing a side. I expect even people who are not currently pirates or consider themselves to be pirates will soon become that before the final battle. You'll know what I mean when we get there. So I feel like this is pretty much the obvious subject that really inspires most of the rest of this. The Straw Hats are going to be connected to all of the major races. The major races meaning the ones that have been highlighted in the story. Straw Hats are going to be connected to and become friends with all of them. But it wasn't until Dressrosa that I became sure that every single major highlighted race is either going to be part of the crew or the Grand Fleet. Obviously, there's important narrative reasons for this, and this is one of the first subjects that I actually talked about on YouTube, which is racism in the world of One Piece and how it might relate to the Void Century. You can see that poneglyphs are being protected by non-human groups, Zo and Minks, Fishman Island. I'm personally placing my bets that there's going to be a poneglyph of some kind in Elbaf with the giants. Even the winged people of Shandia I would consider to be of another tribe. So I have it in my mind that the ancient kingdom was allies with, was friends for, and fought for all the various non-human groups, whereas you see that the celestial dragons nowadays continue to partake in slavery. And one of the big tickets that they'll spend big money for is slavery of non-human tribes. And this is not a new thing, this is a thing that they've always done, because we heard from the dwarves, the Tantata, that their era of slavery was initiated by the previous ruler of Dressrosa, the Don Quixote family, who later went on to become celestial dragons. So as the ancient kingdom seems to have a connection with all of these groups, so too do the Straw Hats. But foremost among them, the biggest connection it appears to be, is of course the Fishmen. We have a direct poneglyph of apology from Joy Boy to the Mermaid Princess. I've always thought of the Fishmen as to sort of represent the problem of slavery and racism in the world of One Piece. So then it always made sense to me that Jinbei, when it was first suggested that he would actually join and sort of represent this on the crew. And then when the Grand Fleet was created, you start to fill out your roster. Oda can't make everybody part of the crew, it's just not possible. I'm sure that if he could, he would have added a crew member for each highlighted race. But it didn't work that way, so instead they go to the Grand Fleet. So you add the Tantata, you add the dwarves, you add Hydrogen, you add the giants, you add long legs and long arms. Coupled with Jinbei, you have the makings of a unified world already within the Straw Hat Pirates itself. But even with the Fishmen, there's still some groups that are left out. One of which that we didn't know too much about until recently is, of course, the tribe, the race of Oni, which Yamato is a member. We don't know much about this, but the fact that Yamato joined the crew instead of the Grand Fleet, I know Yamato has an interesting story in and of itself, but along with Jinbei being a Fishman and Fishman representing a certain kind of problem, I do wonder the role that Oni played during the Void Century. I kind of expect it to be a little bit more significant, and I hope that's part of the story. We obviously don't know too much, but just to throw a speculation out there, based on something that we do know, we get a slave list, a price list in Sabaody. On this list, you see a lot of named races. I presume that these are the ones that are more commonly found, ones that have relatively large numbers. But at the top of this list, they say other rare species. And you'll note that Oni is not on this list. So I think that Oni have to be very rare. And that could tell you a lot about the group by itself. So as Jinbei represents the Fishman, who represents this entire idea of slavery and racism, I think that Yamato and Oni represent this concept of rare species. One's essentially wiped from the map. In my mind, this separates the problem of, for instance, slavery from these rare species. They're so rare that slavery isn't a problem for them. This is like genocide, basically, right? So you could see how Yamato, even as a member of another tribe and part of the Straw Hat crew, how she potentially represents something a little different. So other important tribes that fall within this blanket, right? We know that giants and dwarves and long arms and long legs all join the Strat Grand Fleet rather than the crew, because I think that fishmen sort of represent their roles. Yamato represents this roles for other tribes such as Lunarians or the Three-Eyed Race. But to get to the point here, I think that Oda is going to continue to add to the Grand Fleet. Look at a tribe such as, or race such as the minks. It seems poised. The minks are important enough that you're likely to see the minks join in the Strat Grand Fleet. And I think that this is going to happen through Carrot and Wanda. Carrot got a lot of highlight in Whole Cake Island. It's a thing that where we are in the story right now, it doesn't make too much sense. Simultaneously, a lot of people thought that Inuarashi and Nekomamushi might die here in Wano, thereby necessitating a new king of Zou. And that would likely be Wanda. But they're still alive, and Wanda does not have a responsibility to her country. It's been pretty well laid out that Carrot wants to leave Zou. She wants to adventure. And we have a reason for her to as well, because of Pedro. She's inherited Pedro's dream, his will for the dawn. So I think sometime soon, Carrot and Wanda are going to decide to start their own crew, a mink crew, which will be subordinate to the Strat Pirates. And they'll join the Strat Grand Fleet. This is the easy group to add, but we have some cool possibilities as well. Will there be somebody associated with the crew that is a member of the Three-Eyed tribe? The first example which comes to mind, and I personally believe, is that at some point in time, if not already, Big Mom will die. Thereby, Katakuri will inherit the role of responsibility for the Big Mom Pirates, and that includes pretty much every race, every remaining race that you could think of. Obviously, Pudding as well. But the fascinating thing about the majority of the Big Mom Pirates, particularly Big Mom's children, is none of them actually belong to the race that they are related to. Mainly because all of them are related to Big Mom. All of them associate their identities to Big Mom. And all of them are only half-blooded of whatever other race they belong to. Culturally raised not by this race, but by Big Mom. I personally think, in terms of organizing the story, the Big Mom Pirates represent all the mixed bloods, which is a group unto itself, represented by the Straw Hats, eventually. So I do think that it is a realistic possibility that the Straw Hats actually encounter the true race of Three Eyes and or Lunarians, somewhere else hidden in the world of One Piece, so that the Straw Hats may completely represent these groups as well. And another one that we want to mention here is Oars and the Continent Pullers. Where the hell they could hide in the world of One Piece is a question, but it would be insanely fitting for that to be the case. I almost expect it just because of the Whitebeard pirates. Maybe Oars had a child, or maybe Oars is still alive. The last race that we want to talk about is the winged people of Skypian, Shandian, and Birkin. I think that most people understand, or at least this is a theory that most people subscribe to, is that when it comes time to the final battle, pretty much everybody, every group that these Straw Hats have encountered and befriended throughout are going to be there. And it would be very weird if this didn't include Wiper and the Shandians. Right, that would be weird. Or Conus and Gonfall, Skypians. But with the Skypians and the Shandians, you have an interesting question. One I think is going to be very relevant in the story and leads to some very cool speculations. Why the heck would any of the Skypia ever involve themselves in a war on the Blue Sea? The Straw Hats definitely made friends with both the Skypians and the Shandians in a heartbeat, right? They should fight together. But how is it even possible for them to do so? Are they even aware of the news that's happening down below? Under what circumstances would they willingly travel to the Blue Sea? Why would that make sense? I think at some point in time, the battle down below has to affect those above. So my theory is that the Sky Islands are going to be destroyed, or at least threatened. How this happens is your guess as much as it is mine. Could the world government release something into the sky, or because of conflict in some way that starts deteriorating at the existence of these islands? Or another theory that we have is that the Sky Islands essentially rest on Treasure Tree Adam. The World Tree supports the Sky Islands in some way, creating a sky network, roads, and ability to go from one place to the other in order to collect resources. Another cool theory, of course this isn't justified in any way right now, but it would be cool and it would make sense to me, is if Treasure Tree Atom gets cut down, leading literally everybody who lives in the sky to come down to the blue sea, also simultaneously bringing the world together. Oda has actually used this concept before in Skypiea, where the Skypieans' island was destroyed, forcing them to live together on Jaya with the Shandians. It resolved their conflict, they come together, integration. That may happen with all of the Sky Islands. And I know that people say that it would be crazy if, just insane, it wouldn't make any sense if Treasure Tree Atom was cut down, because we learned from Frankie that Treasure Tree Atom's bark is essentially indestructible. That's what they made the Thousand Sunny out, that's what they made the Oro Jackson out of. That wood is too strong for the tree itself to get cut down. But I think that is possible. It really just depends on what Oda wants to do. We do know that they've been harvesting wood from this tree for a very, very long time, and it could actually be weakening the tree, such that an event like this, which may in the past have not been possible, is possible now. And you could have some serious symbolism and meaning about deforestation here. Cutting down a tree literally brings the world to ruin. But long story short, however it happens, I think that the Sky Islands are going to be in danger. This is going to lead people like Whitebeard onto the Blue Sea, where they won't have a home, and they will be pirates, subordinate to the Straw Hats, part of the Grand Fleet. The last but not least is Tony Chopper. And while he's not technically a race, I think that Chopper represents all the animals of the entire world, because he is by birth an animal. Just gonna throw that in here now. So there's certain factions and or groups within the pirate world that I think are noteworthy enough that the Straw Hats need to include them within their sphere. And just like with the previous topic of races, we've seen this occur already. The prime example of this is the Shichibukai. We have a member on the crew already who was a former Shichibukai, Jinbei. The Shichibukai are a faction that the Straw Hats have integrated within themselves. I'm not for a moment going to suggest that the Straw Hats are going to accumulate allies, that basically every former Shichibukai is going to join the Grand Fleet, because it is simply not something that I believe. But think that you understand that Jinbei is not going to be alone. For instance, the Kuja Pirates and Boa Hancock, a very likely member of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. Talk about Mihawk. Will Mihawk survive or not? If he does survive, then maybe. I personally think he will die. I think Law is another really good example. If Law survives, which is a question, but if Law survives, then he'll probably join the Grand Fleet. Although my brutally honest opinion is that at some point in time, Law should use his immortality surgery, which is supposed to kill him. Another character who is pretty obviously an ally if they survive, but also if things in the story happen, but Kuma is another one that I could also see dying. Most of those that remain, I think, fall more into the territory, if I had to guess, as allies, so they don't consider themselves subordinate to the Straw Hats. However, by the time the final battle rolls around, they'll probably be fighting on the Straw Hat side. I'm thinking about Crocodile, I'm thinking about Gecko Moria if he lives, I'm thinking about Edward Weevil. But things happening in the story could change my perspective. I do like, though, as it stands right now, I feel very confident Jinbei, a previous warlord, is part of the crew, Boa Hancock will be part of the Grand Fleet, and Crocodile seems like a safe guess to be a simple ally. The next pirate group that we want to talk about is we want to talk about the Supernova. Just like every other faction in the world of One Piece, I think that we're going to see a member of the Supernova join the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, become subordinates to the Straw Hat Pirates. So this is another point where I feel like I need to clarify, right? The Straw Hats work very differently from any other pirate crew. Luffy conquers no one. So to be a Grand Fleet member, they have to be spiritually aligned with the Straw Hats. They have to look up to them and basically make themselves subordinates. For me, this disqualifies a character such as Appu. Appu is probably going to fight on the Straw Hat side come the final battle. He doesn't seem particularly strong, he has to latch on somewhere, maybe that's with the Straw Hats. But I could never, right now in the story, I could never see Appu considering the Straw Hat Pirates as like his champion. Considering himself to be their lessers. So to me, he's more of an ally. Obviously, we could still get things in the story, but let's try to focus on Supernova, who I could actually argue as potentially joining the Grand Fleet. And the first and most obvious example of this is Trafalgar Law. As I've pretty much already said, I kind of think Law dies. If he survives, it's very obvious. That's where I stand. The crew that I would consider to have the second best odds and may join the Grand Fleet regardless is Capone Beige. Now Capone works in kind of the same way as Apu. Would he really consider the Straw Hats to be his superiors? By himself, maybe not. However, he is married to Chiffon. Chiffon, whose twin sister is Lola. Lola, who considers Nami to be her sister. We already get a sort of dynamic of their relationship, Capone and Chiffon, and it's kind of like Chiffon ultimately will call the shots. That's how I feel. How I feel the story will go is that the Big Mom Pirates and Big Mom are still relevant in the story, and so is Lola. Therefore, so is Chiffon and Beige. Big Mom will die. I think ultimately Lola joins Chiffon as part of that pirate crew, potentially with Pudding as well. So are there any other Supernova that could join the Grand Fleet? The next name I want to bring up is Eustass Kid. Yes, I do think that it is possible for Eustass Kid to subjugate himself, to choose to be subordinate to these Straw Hat Pirates. As it currently stands in the story, that does not make a whole lot of sense because Kid's will is not broken, but if any point in time that happens, I think that Kid has reason to look up to Luffy. However, those who follow the channel closely know that I've compared Eustass Kid to Bellamy. I think that their stories could be similar, and it's very interesting with Bellamy. The Straw Hat Grand Fleet was formed in Dressrosa. Bellamy knew this and consciously decided to not become a subordinate of Luffy, which is essentially the criteria which defines the Grand Fleet. Is Bellamy an ally? Yes. Is he a friend? Probably. Grand Fleet member? No. We're not going to get into all the details about what I think happens with Eustass Kid, but I think that we all know that he's going to fall short of his dreams. He's going to have every reason in the world to give up and just accept Luffy as king, and will never be. And I don't think that he will. I see, end of story, Kid being the Whitebeard to Luffy's Roger. Something like that. He's never going to stop fighting. Therefore, he will never join the Grand Fleet. Next up, we have Arouge. I think Arouge is interesting. I just don't feel like I know enough about him to really feel strongly about anything. However, my tentative guess is that he does not join the Grand Fleet. Far more interesting is X-Drake and Jewelry Bonney. We'll talk about them a little later on. But just consider it to be not important that they are Supernova. So the thought that I want to leave you guys with is that there will be one Supernova crew that joins the Grand Fleet. Capone Beige. That's my thought. I like this number of 1, it feels very organized. Oda may as well. The next major division of pirates, the faction, I suppose you could call them, that is relevant in the story, is the Yonko. Just as with every other faction, I think that there will be at least one Yonko that joins the Grand Fleet. So let's cross some names off the list first. Blackbeard joins the Grand Fleet? I don't think so. Big Mom and Kaido? I think they both will die. Shanks. Shanks is an easy guess, kind of like Trafalgar Law, about a Yonko who might join underneath Luffy's wing, consider himself to be a subordinate. I personally think that Shanks dies, in kind of the same way that I think about Law. So which Yonko is going to join the Grand Fleet at some point in the future of the story? There's only one guess left, so you know what I'm gonna guess. Our main man, the champion of the people, the world's strongest, Buggy the Clown. I really do think that the topic of this video, the Strats weaving threads through all the various faction and groups in the world of One Piece, bringing them under their wing to join the crew or the Grand Fleet, is a big reason why Oda decided to make Buggy into a Yonko. And as crazy as that might sound, I also do think that it is realistic for Buggy to do this at some point in the future of the story. But similar to Capone Beige, right, we're gonna blur definitions here. I don't feel like I have to argue too hard that the seas are going to get rough in the future of the story. It's going to be all-out chaos, you would presume. And for someone like Buggy, right, Buggy is a poser. That's what he is. So you could make a video talking about how Buggy is insanely strong now, right? But until I see it, I believe that he is a poser. So his primary objective is survival. And I don't think that Buggy would ever consider the Straw Hats to be his enemy, to be a main rival, because what the Straw Hat wants and what he wants are two completely different things. Buggy values things that the Straw Hats do not, primarily real treasure, so they can coexist together without butting heads, right? The reason why Luffy's fighting with all of these Yonko and powerful pirates is they all want the same thing. You have to defeat the other one in order to get what you want, but with Buggy and with Luffy, that is not the case. So the very idea of Buggy, from the beginning of the story till now, is acquiring allies that he doesn't necessarily deserve, while at the same time using various other forms of status or rank that he hasn't necessarily earned or doesn't necessarily believe in to strengthen himself. It starts in Marineford, where Buggy hypes up his own connection to the Roger Pirates, which is, yes, that was true. However, does he really associate himself with that group like that? No, he used it so that for his own benefit. Same with the Shichibukai, probably the same with the Yonko. But you'll notice that it has slowly gotten even more unrealistic. We start with the Roger Pirates. Yes, he was a Roger Pirate, so that's technically true. Then he was made into a Shichibukai. Buggy is realistic as a Shichibukai, I guess. Now a Yonko, it's even more absurd. And finally you end up with the most absurd connection, which is Buggy is subordinate to the Straw Hats. Buggy epitomizes fake it until you make it. So I think that he's going to be the one person who claims to be a Straw Hat Grand Fleet member. Claims to be a subordinate of Luffy, because the idea of it helps protect him. I also think that it could be a great joke, which is kind of Buggy's role. They have a great meeting of like the Straw Hat captains before the final battle, and Buggy just sort of invites himself in there like, "Yes, Luffy, my god, tell me what you require of me." And then you have like a thought bubble, right, of Buggy being like, "I hate every moment of this." But yeah, from here, the only things that we have left to discuss are the remaining pirate crews of former Yonko. Already speculated, I think Kaido, Big Mom, and Shanks die. Blackbeard, no. So, I do think that former Yonko pirate crews might join the Grand Fleet. Big Mom pirates, we've already talked about with Katakuri, I could see that. I'm not sure what remains of Kaido's crew. I really needed King to survive, because if King sort of took up the remaining Beast Pirates, you could see that as a Lunarian he would have a reason to join with Luffy. I also want a Lunarian to be part of the group, so if he survives, then you've essentially killed two birds with one stone. Without him, I really have no idea. And then we have Marco. I think that if Marco was going to die, he would have done so in this arc, but he didn't, so I think that he remains. So you have former Whitebeard pirates joining the Grand Fleet, and then with the remnants of Shanks' crew, if that is a thing, I really do not know. But if they are alive, then of course. So just as races are important in the world of One Piece, classes are equally important. And I think more than anything, this is the fight that the Revolutionary Army represents. But lines are blurred in every respect. There's no faction that is wholly associated with good or with evil. I think the best example of this is Sabo. Sabo was a noble who understood and really identified most with the poor. But that's not to say that certain factions don't create rotten people a little bit more often than others. Here's a quote from Sabo, which I find to be powerful. "This town smells worse than Gray Terminal. It smells like rotten people. If I stay here, I'll never be free. I'm ashamed to be born a noble." And a different quote, "The thing I'm most afraid of is being consumed by this country and becoming a completely different person." The idea, I gather, is that being a part of the elite or the accepted changes you. But with every faction, no matter what, being gray or not totally black or white, I think the point of that is to avoid prejudice, even against groups that are overall the people that we are fighting. Ultimately, I think that the world that Oda is trying to aim for by the end of the story, the world that the Strats might create, is one that is mostly devoid of hate. Or at least, Oda's going to do everything in his power to eliminate this. And this includes for even people like celestial dragons. And the way that I think that Oda is going to accomplish this, again, is the Straw Hat Pirates. The Straw Hat Pirates are going to be connected to literally everyone. So at least you have one example of whatever faction or group in a good light, working hand in hand or together with everybody else, to at the very least be an example or a role model that everyone else can look up to. So essentially right now we are talking about the elites, the royals, the nobles, those sorts of people. I think that the Straw Hats are going to be connected in various ways to nobles from literally everywhere. But as this is the premise of the video, we're going to organize this in a cool way so that it applies to the Straw Hat crew and the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. And so we already have some examples from the crew itself. Sanji is a Vinsmoke. Vinsmokes at one point in time conquered or ruled the entirety of the North Blue. Sanji is a prince. Just like previous examples, I think the Straw Hats have one crew member who sort of represents an entire group. And I think that Sanji represents various kingdoms or rulers of the 4 blues. That's the one that is on the Straw Hat crew. But I think that we're going to have rulers from the 3 other blues that are in the Straw Hat Grand Fleet itself. So from the South Blue, we have the team of Kuma and Jewelry Bonney. I purposefully ignore Jewelry Bonney in the Supernova section because I think that she's more important as a noble and also as a potential Revolutionary Army member. She's really hitting 3 things here with one stone. And actually 4 if you include Kuma because of his former warlord status. So of course Jewelry Bonney's story right now all revolves around Kuma, and Kuma has lost his memories and is basically a shell of himself, but Jewelry Bonney's trying to save him, and I think that she's going to be successful. I think that Vegapunk has his memories stored somewhere and may return them to Kuma at some point in the story. The other theory that's relevant to this is, I think it's pretty obvious, at some point in time the Revolutionary Army just loses, because they're not the Straw Hats. It's just as simple as that. The Straw Hats are the heroes, they're the ones that are going to change the world, so the Revolutionary Army is kind of superfluous. They're going to in some way aid the Straw Hats, and I think in the process of that, they're going to lose. How this works with Kuma, I'm not entirely sure. We're obviously very distantly in the future here. But when Kuma's mind returns and the Revolutionary Army is defeated, also because he was a former pirate, I think that he allies himself with the Straw Hats. And given Kuma's past with the Straw Hats, he's done a lot of good things for them, from letting them go in Thriller Bark to saving the Sunny. I think that if he does return to the story, it would make sense to me for him to join the Grand Fleet. Essentially be a subordinate of Luffy. To take this even further, I wouldn't be surprised to see if the Revolutionary Army lost but Sabo survived, Sabo essentially convert himself to being a pirate rather than a revolutionary. That would definitely make sense as somebody who would swear allegiance to Luffy, and then underneath his wing you could have Jewelry Bonney and Kuma. This works equally well. So here, Sabo could be your ruler or your royalty, your noble from the East Blue as well. The West Blue is a little bit more tricky, but I'm going to try something a little bit different here. Obviously we don't know, right? But just a different storyline is that Sai, who is already a member of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, becomes the king of Kano Country. Kano Country, if you're not aware, is a hyped up kingdom that seems inspired by Chinese culture. They currently have a king who is not Sai. Sai is a member of the Jinjiao family. However, I think after the result of this war, there may be many rulers who die for one reason or another, and I think that Sai is going to be chosen by the people of Kano to be the new king by the conclusion of the story. Personally, I like the way that I've organized this because everybody adds something slightly different. You have a noble, so not a true king in Sabo. You have a former prince in Sanji, whose country used to rule over the entirety of the North Blue. You have a current king when you're talking about Kuma and Jewelry Bonney. And then you have a future king in Sai. Yeah, I like that. But of course, the 4 blues aren't the only ones which have royalty. I think that we'll see this for the Grand Line as well, separated into its 2 parts, Paradise and the New World. We already have a member of the Grand Fleet who is royalty from the Grand Line, specifically from Paradise, and that is Cavendish. Cavendish is formerly the Prince of Bourgeois, and it's stated that the reason why he's no longer a prince is he became too popular. With the New World, I feel it's even easier. Possibly there are too many candidates. For instance, Rebecca and King Riku, if they showed up into the final battle with an armada, they would definitely consider themselves to be subordinate of Luffy, you would imagine, which would technically make them Grand Fleet members and they're already friends. The same would be true of Momonosuke as well. There may be others, so Poseidon and King Neptune being one. There's a lot of choices here, but I do want to mention that Oda has, throughout the story, started to build the connections of Straw Hats. Even though this was something that a lot of people initially didn't want, or maybe they still don't want, this is a thing that is actively happening. Sanji recently became the king of the North Blue, or prince of the North Blue, right? Zoro is in line for something very similar. You cannot convince me that Zoro is not related to Ryuma, and Shimotsuke Ushimaru as well. That's a daimyo, that's royalty, that fits for this criteria. Actually, between Zoro and Sanji, you have a ruler, a former ruler of one of the blues, and then you have a former ruler royalty from the Grand Line. But of course, you know that I want to spice it up just a little bit. We haven't talked about Vivi. Vivi is obviously a ruler, royalty from Alabasta Kingdom. Alabasta is interesting because it was one of the 20 kingdoms which founded the world government. They just never left to go to Marijois, which technically makes Vivi a celestial dragon. The way that I see the story going is I think that Alabasta Kingdom is going to be one of the first ones to fall because of the world government reacting to the changing landscape of the world. They know that Vivi sailed with the Strats. Vivi likely is going to work against their interests, and so I could see them trying to capture Vivi or something happening with her, which is currently happening in the story as well with Saba. We just don't know exactly what it is. And let's also take a moment to remind you guys that Imu had a portrait of Vivi along with Blackbeard, Luffy, and Shirahoshi. So Vivi is important. So the reason that Vivi couldn't travel with the Strats despite the invitation, despite wanting to, is her duties to her country. So I think what's going to happen is that her duties to her country are going to essentially involve herself joining the Strats. That is how she can fulfill her role as princess, as queen. So she will actually join the Strat pirate crew itself. She will sail on the main ship. And at the same time, she will occupy this role of bringing everybody together, occupy this role of celestial dragon. But I just want to throw this out in the dark. I know that there's not a whole lot to justify this, but I wouldn't be surprised to see another member of the crew or the Grand Fleet have direct ties to the Celestial Dragons. More so, one of the Celestial Dragons that at some point in time did actually live in Marijois. There's no extremely great guesses as to who this could potentially be, because most of the Celestial Dragons are nobodies, right? There's some good ones like Mosgard, but you know, the ones that could actually be pirates. Doflamingo, definitely not. So my shot in the dark here is that it's possible that Luffy is related to a family that actually lived at some point in Marijois. Basically, dragon married into a celestial dragon family. Or some other complicatedness to add even more hype to Luffy. You don't have to like this, and I'm not going to justify it too much, I'm just throwing it out there. It definitely does make sense to me that as the Straw Hats themselves are going to bring the world together, that Luffy himself represents two halves of divided factions. For instance, the Void Century, we know, was a fight between the Ancient Kingdom, probably the Family D, and the 20 Kingdoms or the Celestial Dragons. So then he could be one person that is related to both of them. A child of a D and of a Celestial Dragon. Hypothetically. But we're not actually done with this section. We have one more insane speculation for you. I've kind of already laid this out in this video, but the world isn't just simply divided by the four blues, the two halves of the Grand Line, and then the Red Line or Marijois. There is one other distinct area of the world, and that is the Sky Islands. This is totally headcanon in theory, but I imagine an entire world exists up there, far more than any of us have predicted. I think that Oda has laid a trap, and that trap is the winged people. We associate the winged people as the residents of the Sky Island. But I don't think that's the case. And if we go back to Elbaf speculations, right, there's theories that the giants live on top of the tree in Elbaf, which extends into the Sky Island. So now you have giants and you have winged people. But why not more than that? I think that this is alluded to actually in Skypiea itself, where you see Enel. Enel is very curious, because he is not of the winged race. He has no wings. It appears as if he is a normal human. What is a normal human doing in these islands which have been settled by winged people? The answer that I've come to is that he simply, or his family simply, traveled there and settled there. Gonfall tells us that there is a normal way to travel to Skypiea, the summit of High West. It essentially paints this picture that even though Skypiea may be on this very edge of the Sky Islands, that they're all interconnected. You can travel between them all, and it's quite a great distance. It's a whole world. A world I think that the world government has not been able to influence or conquer, because my theory is that the gate, the way to get up to it that would be easiest that you could imagine actually taking place, is guarded by the giants of Elbaf. So I think that this area could potentially surpass our imaginations and could be much more diverse than you think that it is. Meaning essentially that I'm speculating that there are entire villages or kingdoms or islands of regular humans that live up in the sky. Essentially royalty of the sky. And I have a theory as to who could be a part of the crew or the Grand Fleet which would fulfill this criteria. We've already talked about how Oda is building up the reputations of the actual Straw Hat members themselves. He's giving them connections slowly to important groups of people or past events in some way. As I speculate this for Zoro, I speculate this for essentially every remaining Straw Hat, even if we don't know the answer yet. But my theory is that Nami is descended from royalty that lived up in the sky. I think most here know the story of Nami, but Nami was a baby on a war-torn country. There was a fight between the Marines and somebody else, and Bellemere happened to find her. But what's clear from the story is that Nami has a lot of unexplained talent, and I think that this offers prime opportunity for her to be connected in some way to a powerful lineage. Being royalty from the Sky Islands would explain a lot, and there's a couple things that could be seen as hints if this is true. For instance, during the 2-year time skip, Kuma sent Nami to a Sky Island. But even more than this, and this is the real evidence which substantiates this in my mind, is we learn about waivers when we get to Skypiea, and it's explained by Conus like, it took me 10 years to figure out how to ride a waiver. And as she says this, Nami picks it up immediately, which baffles both Conus and Paglia. I think that Nami was able to pick it up immediately because she is by lineage from the Sky Islands. And we know that waivers aren't new technology, it's old technology, because Mont Blanc Nolan talked about waivers in his experience and his adventures hundreds of years in the past. Overall, you get the sense, and this hasn't been confirmed, but you get the sense that traveling the Sky Islands may be even more difficult than traveling on the Grand Line, requiring greater navigational skills. Nami, as she is writing the waiver, points out how her specific talents help her command the waiver. And I think that she has these specific talents because she's from a bloodline that was very good at adventuring in the Sky Islands. The only question that we have is, if Nami is by lineage from the Sky Islands, how did she end up on the Blue Sea? This could be an insanely good story that could add to the world building of the Sky Islands if Oda chooses. Obviously, all we can do at this point is throw darts at the wall, but, like for instance, maybe the giants from Elbaf climbed up the tree at some point recently, so they weren't always in the Sky Islands. It was previously populated by other people. Once the giants like Loki got up there, they started conquering the Sky Islands, including whatever kingdom or island that Nami's family was from. So to save Nami, they escaped and snuck her to the Blue Sea. That could be cool. But there's a place within the Straw Hat sphere for government factions as well. Government factions, what am I talking about? I'm talking about Marines, I'm talking about Cypher Pol, potentially talking about Sword. I don't want to divvy up the Marines into like admirals, vice admirals, that sort of thing. Not going to do that. Also, not including the Gorosei. Sorry. But I think that we have some good speculations here as well. A Marine that is either a part of the Straw Hat crew or the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. I think that a lot of people will probably guess Kobe, because Kobe and Luffy are already friends. But that's not my guess. My guess is Smoker. A lot of people sort of imagine in-game, who is Roger's Garp, right? Is it Kobe or is it Smoker? And for me, it isn't much of a question. Roger's Garp is for sure currently Smoker. The whole idea of Roger and Garp's relationship is that Roger did all this crazy stuff and Garp essentially chased him around the New World. They battled a few times, but there was never a decisive victor, and then at the end of the story, when Roger turned himself in, you realize that Roger had earned a friend. I think the very same thing is going to happen with Smoker, and it's very different from Kobe, for instance. Kobe kind of came out of the box as a friend, but Smoker has been following the Strats from the very beginning of the story. They've clashed multiple times, and more than any Marine in the entire story, Smoker has reason to believe in the Strats' goodness, in the Strats' justice. Smoker, more than any other Marine, knows all of the evidence which suggests that the Strats are helping the world and they are fighting against evil, which should be what the Marines do. And at the same time, while Smoker is doing this, he is finding out things that probably he wished he didn't know. I think that Smoker's story, even though we don't know how much stronger he is now or is going to be, I think that it is essentially the same as Garp. He is gaining in rank as the Strats do, gaining in notoriety. I think that he has a massive power-up in store for him, perhaps once he awakens his Devil Fruit. At some point he will become Admiral level. It's also additionally possible that if an Admiral goes down, that Smoker is offered the opportunity to become one. But he'll make the choice that Garp never did, which is to switch sides. But he won't believe in pirates in general. I don't think that he trusts pirates in general. The only pirate crew that he trusts, that he knows is good, is the Strat Pirates. And I think that sometime soon he will be heavily involved in some arc again related to the Strats, but this will be the final time that Smoker will ever be considered to be an enemy. Next up we have Sword, and why not just use Kobe here, right? Like, Kobe, if ever shit hits the fan, is most definitely going to side with Luffy because Luffy is on the side of what is right? And so if Kobe ever did this, then he would obviously be a subordinate of Luffy. Likely he'll have his own ship at this point, so a subordinate captain. I would, however, like for Kobe's switch to be much later in the story, and for there to be another member of Sword associated with the Strats. I'm not going to speculate this, but I'm just throw that out there. That would be cool. Actually, I will throw out a name. X-Drake. X-Drake we know is a member of Sword. Could also see him becoming a true ally of the Strats, and also is already incognito, in disguise as a pirate. And of course there's another theory related to this about Law, that Law might secretly be a member of Sword, so if he survives, which again I don't believe, but if he does, then he could fulfill that criteria as well. If that theory is true, which is, big if, I get it, just saying. And last but not least, we need a member of Cypher Pol, either a part of the crew or a part of the Grand Fleet. This one is a really intriguing speculation. I think that most people are probably going to guess that I'm going to guess Lucci, but I am not. So it's like, who could it be, right? And that's what's so exciting about Cypher Pol. Same thing with Sword, is we already have confirmation that this group is fully capable of trained to change their identities. We see in Water 7 that the Galileo shipwrights, many of them, are agents of Cypher Pol, agents that have been deep undercover for years. Essentially, you would never know until they started revealing their cards. We see the same thing is true with Stussy. Stussy, who was a member of the Underground, but also a member of CP0. So it's very clear the president has been set that they can literally be anywhere. So who is my guess? Another shot in the dark, but I'm going to shoot my shot. My guess is Bartolomeo. Now, there's nothing concrete here that it can actually lend towards any speculation, but when thinking about somebody who could be an agent of Cypher Pol, you have to assume that they're living some sort of false identity. And the one character who I look at as having kind of a sketchy story is Bartolomeo. I don't really think that I need to explain this, right? It's a joke, so because it's funny, it doesn't necessarily need to make sense, but at the same time, it kind of doesn't make too much sense. At the same time, every member of the Strat Grand Fleet and the crew has ties, associations, or will have them, to all the major factions that we could imagine. Talking specifically about the Grand Fleet, right, you have several members that are associated to the various tribes. You have a full-blown admiral who also associate as like the human guy. And then you have a prince. But Bartolomeo is just kind of there, like, who are you? What are you? What is the grand scheme importance? Did Oda really need to devote a Grand Fleet crew member to, like, a fan club? I suppose at the end of the day, if Oda wants to make more out of it, he could. If Bartolomeo came out as a member of Cypher Pol, that the government sort of understood early on that Luffy was a person worthy of following, that he was a person of interest. So had an undercover Cypher Pol agent track his journey, such that he could potentially join Luffy in the future as an undercover spy, it works for me. But as this is about bringing the world together, not being betrayed, I think that there has to be, that whoever the Cypher Pol agent has to be in this case, has to actually end up loyal to Luffy by the end of the story. And I could see that with Bartolomeo as well. So, like, did I get everyone here? I really don't know if I did. This video ended up being way longer than I wanted it to be, but I hope that it was interesting throughout. But the main concept, of course, is that the Strads are going to unite everyone. And then from their ships itself, like Straw Hat ships or Straw Hat associated ships, you're going to see a representation of the world together in every conceivable way. Like the Thousand Sunny is basically Noah's Ark, right? That's how you got to think about this theory. So from that, you get some pretty cool speculations. I didn't even mention some other cool ones, like Usopp being a descendant of Nolan the Liar, right? We still haven't made any concrete speculations about Brook's past or Frankie's past. Frankie was apparently the son of pirates, but there is likely to be more there, in my opinion. Brook obviously was in a convoy in the West Blue at some point in time. Could he potentially have marine ties, or, you know, there's options here. Likely there will be more of this in the story in some way, I would imagine, but I really wanted to stick with, the various geographical areas of the world, actual factions that exist, that are at each other's throats. But anyway, I really hope that the video was enjoyable. Don't get too triggered. If any particular speculation you didn't like, it could be taken in a million ways, and I'm curious as to your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, like the video if you liked the video, dislike the video if you disliked the video, subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content, and as always guys, have a wonderful day.